But no, not Meadland, with its wealth of woods, nor Ganges fair, and Ermus, thick with gold, can match the praise of Italy, nor India, nor Bactria, nor Panchaea, one wide tract of incense-teeming sand. Heavy harvests and the massic juice of Bacchus fill its borders, overspread with fruitful phlox and olives. Here blooms perpetual spring and summer here. In months that are not summers, twice teem the phlox, twice doth the tree yield service of her fruit. So wrote the poet Virgil of the glory of Italy in his epic Georgics, first performed for Octavian Caesar on his return to Italy in 29 BC, following victory over Mark Antony at Actium, the moment many consider the birth of the Roman Empire. Although Italy had suffered turmoil and war in the preceding 50-year struggle for supremacy that began with Rome's first civil war in 81 BC, the Augustan age established that seminal year of Virgil's recitation would be remembered as a high point of prosperity and influence. It was this golden age that the modern, reunified nation of Italy sought to recreate when it celebrated its reunification almost 1900 years later. Before we learn how modern Italy cannot recreate the triumphs of this glorious ancient past, if you're interested in early access to videos and live chats with the creator of Intrigued Mind, consider subscribing to our Patreon. Your support will greatly help us keep the channel producing more intriguing content. In his biography of Augustus, the historian Johann Blicken writes, "The decades of the reign of Augustus are notable for the relative economic prosperity of Italy. Towns and cities were adorned with fine buildings. The road network was improved and extended, and everywhere the rich and distinguished built country houses and fine villas in town, while most of the tribute and other dues from the provincials was spent in Italy when it was not needed for the army stationed on the borders. The Roman province of Italia was the central hub of trade and wealth, with its empire over the next century expanding from the lowlands of Scotland to the Euphrates River in what is today Iraq. In addition to their advantageous position as Roman citizens, and thus afforded rights throughout the world that were denied to the subject peoples in other provinces, Italians were also excused many of the taxation burdens that weighed on the conquered areas, as well as a ban on compulsory military service, which had been a hallmark of Italian life for centuries. This advantageous situation continued for almost 300 years, the same period of time between the arrival of the Mayflower in North America and the present day. Even with the loss of its elevated status during the crisis of the 3rd century and the removal of Rome as the capital of the empire in the 4th, Italy remained one of the richest areas in the world until the catastrophe of the 6th century Gothic War, when Rome and almost every town and city on the peninsula suffered irreparable damage and finally succumbed to dismemberment between Eastern Roman and Lombard regions at the end of decades of conflict. Italy would remain a geographical expression rather than a political entity for 1400 years. During this period, most of its territories were subject to foreign domination, beginning with the Lombards and ending with the Austro-Hungarians, with a myriad of others in between, from the Frankish Emperor Charlemagne to Napoleon Bonaparte. Individual Italian cities were powerful and influential during the medieval period, most notably Venice and Genoa, both of which established colonies around the Mediterranean. In the course of the 11th and 12th centuries, Genoa was able to extract free trading rights in both Islamic Egypt and Syria, while Venetian ships were the deciding factor in the 1204 fall of Constantinople in the Fourth Crusade. But that is a story for another video. Venice later fought full-scale wars against the Ottoman Empire, arguably the foremost power in Europe during the early modern period, but none of them came close to controlling all of Italy, let alone the glories of ancient Rome. The reunited Kingdom of Italy was established in 1861 and annexed the Papal States 10 years later, setting most of the modern borders of the country in place. The new kingdom found itself far behind its European competitors in industry, military power, and education, but it set about making up for lost time with a program of industrialization, military armament, and colonial expansion. An initial colonial foray failed when it was pushed aside by France in a contest for control of Tunisia in 1881. With British permission, Italy was able to take control of Somaliland and it won some limited military victories against the Mahdists in Sudan during the next decade. Its first attempt to overrun a territory of any significance ended in failure, however, when the Ethiopians defeated an Italian army at the Battle of Adwa in 1896. Italy only just managed to win the underpopulated territory of Libya from the ailing and decrepit Ottoman Empire in 1912, as the campaign suffered reversals and veered very close to another failure. Although the government of Prime Minister Giovanni Giolitti declared victory over the Ottomans with the Treaty of Ushi in October 1912, The Italian army never really succeeded in controlling the wild southern interior of the country, and their areas of authority were limited to the coastal regions. This pattern was repeated 3 decades later, when in spite of Benito Mussolini's declarations that his fascist reforms had made Italy stronger than ever and a new Roman Empire was an inevitability, the Italian army once again veered close to calamity in its 1936 invasion of Ethiopia. The campaign was declared a success, but it was a paper veneer over a continued armed struggle. Although Italy was capable of occupying tiny and poor Albania in both the First and Second World Wars, Mussolini required German assistance when the unlikely Kingdom of Greece not only managed to defeat his invasion, but actually mounted a counterattack against the Italian positions in Albania in 1941. From that point, any lingering fantasy that Italy could resurrect its past glories and rebuild its paramount role in world affairs was dismissed. Today, Italy remains one of the 10 largest economies globally, and its military spending is the 12th highest in the world. Its place as a regional power is assured, and it is influential in world affairs, with chairs on some of the most important bodies, like the G7. How is it, though, that Italy once ruled as the premier global leader, but its modern incarnation never again obtained a place in the first rank of great powers? The answer, perhaps surprisingly, lies in geography. While Italy may appear to be in an advantageous position to control the Mediterranean, the historian David Gilmour points out that Italy has more than 4,500 miles of coastline, a distance virtually impossible to properly patrol, especially when Italy's significant number of islands is considered, and the country is vulnerable to sea attack from no fewer than 3 different continents. In the north, the Alps give the illusion of protection, but the majestic mountain range has never actually stopped a hostile army, whether it be Hannibal and his elephants, Attila the Hun and his horsemen, or Napoleon Bonaparte and his artillery. When the Kingdom of Italy was declared, fewer than 1 in 40 of its inhabitants spoke the language we now describe as Italian. France too had to overcome a difference in regional linguistics, but the unique Italian landscape, wherein the majority of the country is dominated by the Apennine Mountains, meant that its diversity of communities and culture was particularly pronounced and difficult to penetrate. Communication and development were also hampered by the country's lack of navigable rivers. France, with an abundance of great rivers such as the Seine and Rhône, contains 6,000 miles of navigable waterways. Italy, by contrast, has at best 10% of this amount. Even at the height of the Roman Empire, Italy was a net importer of metal and timber, and this lack of raw materials was even more pronounced in the period after unification, when great powers like Great Britain and Germany were surging in armaments and industrialization before the First World War. After millennia of deforestation and without an empire to provide raw materials, Italy struggled to compete at such a level. Bismarck, the Iron Chancellor of Germany in the 1870s, famously said, "Italy has a large appetite, but small teeth." Perhaps the most fundamental difference between the Greco-Roman classical period and the world that the unified Kingdom of Italy faced in the 19th century, however, was the global nature of trade, politics, and warfare. During the height of the Roman Empire, Italy did have a highly advantageous geographical position in regard to trade with mainland Europe. Roman merchants could send ships down the Adriatic to Egypt and the Levant and avail themselves of the goods of the Orient from as far afield as India and China. These were then sold at an enormous profit to Gaul, Germania, and Britain, lands whose people could not reach the Middle Eastern ports for luxury items. Italian wine, olive oil, and ceramics were also prized in the still underdeveloped northern provinces. During the medieval and early modern period, the great Italian ports of Venice and Genoa continued to profit from this trade, and they were at the center of European affairs during the Crusades and the wars against the Ottoman Empire. From the beginning of the 1500s, the focus of European trade was immeasurably altered by the discovery of America and the route to India by the southern Cape of Africa. Western and Northern European nations like Portugal, England, and the Netherlands, which had for centuries been second-rate backwaters in comparison to the Mediterranean lands, were now in the pole position to reach these new markets, and their wealth and power surged over the following centuries. Venice and Genoa, without the raw materials to build the ocean-going ships necessary to ply these new routes, and isolated in the Mediterranean Sea, went into relative decline. The Grand Duchy of Tuscany did attempt to establish a colony on the north coast of South America in the early 1600s, as did the Order of the Knights Hospitaller, operating from Sicily. But, like the Scottish attempt to establish a colony at Darien, they came to nothing. Italians like Christopher Columbus and Amerigo Vespucci instead used their talents in the service of great Atlantic powers of the early modern period, like Spain. By the time Italy had reunified, Its geographical position now meant it was extremely isolated from the great shipping lanes of modern maritime commerce. Spanish, French, Dutch, Portuguese, and British ships had long discovered how to bypass the Mediterranean for Far Eastern goods, and Italian ports and traders had never managed to penetrate North America or the Caribbean. Even the opening of the Suez Canal in 1881 did not alleviate this state of affairs, as the new cross-continental waterway was under firm British control until a decade after the Second World War. The idea that the new Italy could bring about a resurrected empire and greatness for its people and the peoples of Europe was a stirring and inspiring dream for many great thinkers and writers like Petrarch and Machiavelli. But the reality of the changed world meant that it remained just that, a dream. Given the brutality necessary for the Romans to achieve their empire, in the end, this was a positive for humanity, and instead of a hegemon, modern Italy retains its place in the second rank of nations, still one of the most successful countries on earth, and a byword for culture and the good life, visited every year by millions wishing to enjoy its treasures. For more videos on the most amazing forgotten parts of our history, be sure to subscribe to the Intrigued Mind channel, like the video, and leave your suggestions in the comments below.